Hi everyone. Final exam coming up, so I want to go through the review document and help you guys organize your studying. And of course, if you guys have any questions, you can email me or make an appointment to ask questions. So first of all, the format is very similar to your normal tests. It's just slightly longer. You will have an hour and 50 minutes, so you should have plenty of time to finish this exam without having to rush. First exercise is, as always, your à l'écoute section. Let's see if I can get that bigger. Your à l'écoute section, which is the oral comprehension. Mainly that's going to be from the last two chapters that we've been doing. So you can kind of pinpoint and focus on restudying those. Don't forget that at the end of each chapter you have an audio recording of those vocabulary words. So make sure that you listen to them because that will help you for your à l'écoute section. Your dictée, as always, is pretty cumulative. So, your verbs are on there for sure. You're going to want to make sure to be able to tell the difference in pronunciation between all of your verb tenses so that even if you hear one verb and you know it's a verb, you can make sure to double check the spelling given the rest of the grammar context from the rest of the paragraph. I guess that would kind of, I might go over, I guess, the as we do the question personnelle and all of the tenses here. So doing the present, passé composé, imparfait, futur proche, and the futur simple, as well as the negation. So I'm going to take one verb here, and that's also going to help us with the dictée. I'm going to take one verb, and I'm going to do it in each of these tenses. So I'm going to go over here, and let's say that I use a regular verb. I will use parler. Okay, to speak. If I'm going to do present tense, I have just one verb. So I'd have something like je parle, tu parles, il parle, nous. Boy, this is not very good. Let's try again. Nous parlons, vous parlez, easy, and il parle. So present tense has just one verb. The imparfait also has one verb. It's based on your new form. Take off the ONS and add the endings. So your imparfait would be parler, tu parlais, il parlait, nous parlions, IONS, vous parliez, IEZ, and il parlait, AIENT. Endings for imparfait are AIS, AIS, AIT, IONS, IEZ, AIENT. So this is present. This is imparfait. Your futur simple also has just one verb. You take your infinitive or your irregular root, parler, then you add on your endings, parlerai, tu parleras, il parlera, nous parlerons, vous parlerez, and ils parleront. So I'd like to point out some similarities here between these three verb tenses that have one. Parle, parle, and parle all sound the same. Parler, the infinitive, sounds the same as parler, the EZ. And it also sounds the same as parler anywhere from your imparfait. So yellow sounds the same, pink all sounds the same. Actually, this yellow one also. And then in terms of your future tenses, parlerai sounds the same as parlerai. Parleront sounds the same as parleront. And then parlera sounds the same as parlera. Which makes things difficult, but again, as long as you are checking your grammar and your context for the rest of the paragraph, it should be quite helpful. Obviously, if you're talking in present tense in a dictée for something like that, most of everything else is going to be in present tense as well. If you're talking in the past, then your imparfait might be in there with passé composé. And if, of course, you're talking about futur and you've got some like quand expressions, dès que, lorsque, aussitôt que, si, then you'd be more likely to have your futur simple. Moving on then to the verb tenses that have to. All right. Sorry. Technology is kind of tough for me today. So two verbs. Let's start with the futur proche. This has two verbs. You're going to have some form of aller plus the infinitive. So je vais. Oops, come on. Je vais aller. Tu vas aller. Il va aller. Nous allons aller. Oh, I used aller here, but any of these allers could have been parler to keep it the same. So vous allez aller. And ils vont aller. But it's good for you guys to see that not to be freaked out by the fact that you have a form of aller conjugated plus the aller infinitive. Any of these, like I said, in the infinitive could have or should have been parler, because that was the original one I started with. So that's your futur proche. You could also do what's called the present modulation, which is, instead of this first verb being aller, it's a preference verb, or avoir, pouvoir, devoir, vouloir, avoir envie, literally any other verb, but essentially you've got this first one conjugated and the second one is the infinitive. So it's the same exact structure as your futur proche. Then we've got the passé récent, again the same structure. This one, instead of using aller, it uses that's a C. Instead of using aller, it uses venir. So, for example, je viens de parler. Tu viens, these are S's, de parler. Il vient with a T, de parler. So I just came from doing these things. Nous venons de parler, infinitive. Vous venez de parler. And ils viennent de parler. So that's your futur proche. So the futur proche and the passé récent are very, very similar in structure. First verb conjugated, second verb infinitive. In the case of passé récent, it's venir plus de plus infinitive. In the case of futur proche, it's aller, no preposition, plus the infinitive. After that, you have the passé composé. This also has two verbs. Your first one is avoir or être. So in the case of avoir, j'ai, tu as, il a, nous avons, vous avez, ils ont. That's your first verb. And your second verb is the past participle. So in this case, parler, parler, accent aigu, parler, accent aigu. Nous avons parlé, accent aigu, vous avez parlé, and ils ont parlé. And then also, when you do passé composé, you have the possibility of your verb being with être. If that were the case, if it's in the song, aller, partir, sortir, venu, descendu, retourner, Arrivé, resté, monté, tombé, entraîné, est mort, devenu, revenu, rentré, passé. Or it's one of our reflexive and reciprocal verbs like se brosser, se lever, s'habiller, se souvenir. You're going to be using être. Let's see. Je suis... Well, let's go back to aller, I guess. Je suis allé. Oops. Tu es allé. Il est allé. Nous sommes allés. That's an O. Vous êtes allés. And ils sont allés. Remembering that with être, you have to have agreement. So I'm going to put agreement over here. Maybe you have an extra E here. Maybe you have an extra E here. That wasn't so nice looking. You might have an extra E here if if it's instead of il, it's elle. Sorry. Technology today is just rough. I don't have my Apple Pencil, so I'm using something else. On the new form, you might have an E, but you for sure are going to have an S. For vous, you may have an E or you may have an S or both. Both are optional. And for il and elle, you may have an extra E if it was elle, and for sure you're going to have an S. So watch out that you make sure that you've got your agreement for être. So if you're able to identify the tenses in your question personnelle, then you'll be able to reuse them. And in terms of pronunciation, again, we've got some things that sound similar. Obviously, all of your infinitives. Let's see, pink. I think it was that one. All of your infinitives that were over here on pink, so parler, parler with an EZ, parler from the infinitive, that's going to, of course, sound the same as your infinitive for any of these. And it's also going to sound the same as your past participles. So you're going to have to pay very close attention to the number of syllables that you have. Ooh, about to sneeze. Excuse me. The number of syllables that you have, and that's going to help you identify if you have an extra verb. Are you hearing an extra syllable or two with some form of aller in the beginning? Then you've got futur proche. Are you hearing vient or venir or something like that plus de? Then you have passé récent. Or are you hearing avoir or être before that last part? So once you figure out that, then you want to use that to reuse the structure essentially. So if you can count the number of verbs, that will help you a lot. Then reuse your structure. And of course, watch out if you need to add a negation. Remember that the rule on this, okay, not only is it ne pas, but you could have multiple ones. But ne, like ne plus, ne jamais, etc. Ne always goes directly after the subject. And pas always goes directly after the first verb. There's no real exceptions to that because remember, if you have pronouns in here, try that again. If you have pronouns in any of these tenses, this is where they're going to go. Let me... I guess blue. We'll do blue. If they're going to have pronouns, you're going to have, in the case of anything with a first verb, it's going to go before the verb. So subject, pronoun, verb. In the case of two verbs, your futur proche, your present modulation, and your passé récent, all of those are going to have subject, first verb first, and then pronoun, and then the infinitive. whereas your passé composé is going to be subject, first verb, second verb, and your pronouns go before your first verb. So then when you add a negation, the rule is that it always goes directly after your subject and directly after your first verb, which is helpful because in the passé récent, for example, you have de, and you don't want to put your pas on the other side of de. The de will end up going right here. And then same thing for present tense. Your ne goes here, and your pas, goes after the verb. There we go. Okay, enough about verbs. All right. For the parole section, you have analogies, which is like A is to B as A prime is to B prime. So example, your finger is to your hand as your nose is to your face. So creating those relationships and then filling out vocabulary appropriately. Then your structures. Your relative pronouns, that's a fill in the blank with qui, que, ou, and dont. We'll go over how to do that. Then you have present tense, regular and irregular verbs from chapters 8 to 14, including your reflexive verbs. It is a fill in the blank and it has a word bank. So you need to know what the verb means so you can put it in the right place and then conjugate. Make sure that you're using present tense. This is where your verb review sheet, that's extra credit before the exam, would be really, really helpful for you to not only fill out, but then also memorize. After that, you'll have your passé composé versus imparfait. It's fill in the blank, but your verbs are in parentheses. So you don't need to choose where the verbs go, but you do need to choose, are you using passé composé or are you using imparfait? And then you fill in the correct conjugation. Of course, there will be partial credit. So if you, for example, choose that it's imparfait, even though it should be passé composé, but you did the imparfait grammatically correct, or I should say the conjugation correctly, then it's partial credit, and vice versa. If you guessed the right tense, but you spelled it wrong, then also partial credit. After that, you'll have another paragraph of filling in verbs, and this time it's with present and futur simple rather. That's with si, which it gets si plus present is future, and also quand, lorsque, dès que, donc, sitôt que, which get futur proche for both sides of the verb. Finally, after that, we will have all of our tenses together with triangle pronouns and stress pronouns. And after that, you'll have your lecture culturelle. At the bottom of this, then, you'll have your verb, an extra verb sheet. I will pick out 5 random verbs, and if you can do them the same way as the verb review sheet directions, and I'll spell the directions out on your exam as well, then you can get up to 5 extra points on your exam. So it'll be like, oh, can you do this in the present tense? Can you show me the imparfait route? Can you show me the future route? And can you tell me how you would do the passé composé? And of course, can you tell me the meaning? So they'll all be spelled out in the same way. But if you can do 5 of them by heart, that's up to 5 points on your actual exam. All right, so getting into the actual practice, the dictée, as usual, there's an MP3 up there, and if there's not, I'll double check and I'll make sure that there is one. After that, you've got relative pronouns. So the key for relative pronouns, I'm going to put it over here. You've got this paragraph, and you need to go in sort of descending order. Remember that relative pronouns, you have a sentence first, and then in the middle of it, you've got a blank, and you've got the rest of the sentence that's happening after it. Based on what's happening, in particular after the blank, is going to help you figure out what to use. So if I have just a verb after my blank, I have to use qui. It translates as that or which. So make sure that once you've filled it in, you go back and you try to double check yourself. Does it make sense in that sentence to say that or which? Or sometimes, occasionally, it can also mean who. But I know that qui we always associate with looks like a person, but it's not always the case. It can be just an object. So if you don't have qui, then you can go to asking yourself about the next one. After this blank, do I have a subject and a verb? And would this thing before the blank be considered a place or location or a time? In which case I'm trying to essentially say when or where. Then I want to fill out with où, with the accent on it. If I don't have these first two, then I can go on and ask myself, what about this next option? Which is that after the blank, I do have a subject and a verb, whereby this first thing is the owner of this thing over here. Some sort of a possessed object or person. So this person owns this thing. This could be a person, actually, right? Like if I want to say, oh, so-and-so, this young boy's father, that's where we'd have the young boy here, and his father would be over here. So even though the other subject is not an object, it's a person, it can still happen. So in this case, what I'm trying to get across is whose, and I would fill in my relative pronoun as dont. Oops. Next, moving down. If I don't have any of those first three, then I want to keep moving and ask myself, well, maybe I have this next one, which is now again, after the blank, I have a subject and a verb. And it's a verb that used to have a dangling de. You won't see the de. It will be invisible to you. But this has a tendency to be one of just a couple of verbs that you normally have a de. So those verbs that I would recommend you guys just memorizing would be avoir envie de. The de will be gone. Avoir besoin. Sorry. I'm trying to erase that. Okay. Avoir besoin de, parler de, and rêver de. So avoir envie means to want, avoir besoin means to need, parler means to talk, and rêver means to dream. And generally these four, and they're not an exhaustive list, but they're good ones to memorize for you guys. These four always have de after them. You're talking about somebody, you're dreaming about something, you have need of something, you have envy or desire of something or for something. So the de won't be there, but if you've got one of these four verbs, it's also going to be dont. In this case, it's not being translated as whose, but it's being translated as of or from or sometimes about which. Oops. And if you don't have any of these things, so you don't have qui, ou, dont, or the second dont, then you've got another sentence, you've got a blank, you've got another subject verb, blah, 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 and you have a catch-all. That catch-all is either que, or in the case of a vowel, que apostrophe. And that goes back to just meaning that or which is kind of silly because, of course, we know that qui, our first option, means that or which. But this is just grammatically for the ones that still have a subject and a verb intact at that point. All right, so that's relative pronouns. Try it on your own and pause the video, I guess, and then you can come back because I'm going to use these rules to fill out this paragraph. All right, so relative pronouns. Un ami américain m'a demandé des conseils pour son voyage en Europe. J'ai dit blank, le sud de la France est un bon choix. After my blank, I have a subject, le sud de la France, and a verb, est. So I definitely can't have qui. Then I would move on and ask myself, is the thing before the blank a location or a time? Die is a verb, It's definitely not a location or a time, so I'm not going to use où. Then I'll ask myself, does the thing before the blank, D, own the thing right after the blank, le sud? No, because D isn't a thing, and it definitely doesn't own the south of France. So therefore, I can't use the first form of dont. Then I look to my next one. Does the verb I have, is it one of the expressions that had a dangling de? Et is être. It's not one of the four that I talked about, avoir envie de, avoir besoin de, parler and rêver. There's no dangling de here. Therefore, I'm at my catch-all, which is que. I check for vowels, no problems, so therefore, que. Next. Il fait beau et il y a beaucoup de personnes, blank, parlent anglais. After my blank, what am I left with? Do I have a subject and verb or just a verb? In this case, it's just a verb. Therefore, I'm going to fill in qui, which is my only option. Je connais un hôtel blank. Il peut rester. After my blank, am I left with a subject verb or just a verb? In this case, I have il, subject, and peut, which is a verb, so I can't use qui. Then I go to the next one. Before the blank, does this thing represent a location or a time? I know a hotel. Yes, I would say where after that. I know a hotel where he can stay. So, où with an accent. Il y a un office de tourisme blank. Les employés connaissent tous les bons restaurants. After the blank, do I have a subject and verb or just a verb? I have a subject, les employés, and I have a verb connaissent, so I can't use qui. Then I can ask myself, is the thing before the blank considered a place or a time? There's an office of tourism or a tourism bureau where the employees know all of the good restaurants. Yeah, that could be considered a location. So I'll put où in again. En plus, c'est un cinéphile et il peut voyager à Cannes pendant le festival. C'est l'expérience blank. Il rêve depuis des années. After the blank, do I have a subject and verb or just a verb? I have a subject and a verb, so I can't use qui. Then I ask myself, does the word before, could it be considered a location or a time? L'expérience can't be a location or a time. No, so I'm not going to use où. Then I ask myself, does the thing before the blank own the thing after the blank? Does the experience own him? No, it can't be that form of dont. I can then ask myself, what about the verb that's after the blank? Rêver, is that one of the ones that normally goes with de? It indeed is. It's one of the four I've listed. So I have the idea of de in there that's no longer there. It becomes dont in my actual relative pronoun. It's the experience of which he's been dreaming for years. Next exercise is the present tense. I probably don't need to do much here. You would just need to try and put these into the right place and conjugate them, keeping in mind that there are a number of irregulars. You will use each one once. You don't need to use them twice. Passé composé versus imparfait, filling the verbs to complete Julia's story. So it's important that you read the directions on this because, as we know, passé composé can lead to agreement on our verbs here with an extra e or an s or an es. So the fact that this is Julia's story, she's a feminine person, you may have to watch out for that. So first, let's talk about what's the difference between passé composé and imparfait. If we look back at our conjugations here, we see that our imparfait right here has one verb to it. Endings, or it starts from your new form, you take off ONS and you add on endings AIS, AIS, AIT, IONS, IEZ, AIENT. Everything is regular in imparfait except for être. So I'm going to put that down here. So être for imparfait. It's not based on the new form. your root is et, and you add your normal endings. Passé composé, on the other hand, has two verbs. Here they are. If I can make it bigger, please. Oh my gosh, there we go. These guys right here, you've got two verbs. First one is avoir or être. Second one is the past participle. You may get agreement for sure if you have être. You can also get agreement if you have a direct object pronoun.